on.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Freeology Friday. I'm Aaron Tomlinson, and he is...
I'm Derrick Day.
How you doing tonight, Derrick?
You know something, Aaron? I'm at a good point.
Good.
I'm at a good point. I told you about my week, and it's been challenging, but I'm at a place where I'm at peace. So I'm good.
That's all you can ask for.
Yeah.
What's in the glass?
Well, I have something special. I have some potato vodka,
Yeah.
right? And some hibiscus ginger beer and lime juice.
All right.
And it's a variation of a Moscow Mule, but with hibiscus. Now, let me say this. I had this once with lavender ginger beer, and it was one of the most amazing mules I ever had.
I bet.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to secure any lavender ginger beer in such a short period of time, but I could go right around the corner and get this, which is pretty still ace high.
Yeah. It's hard to find lavender flavored stuff, you know? It's not exactly flying off the shelves, I guess. I've got a White Russian. So for anybody that doesn't know, it's equal parts Kahlua, vodka, and I usually use half and half, but I didn't have any, so whole milk tonight.
Okay.
So
yeah, whole milk works, whole cream works, half and half works. You know, I've even seen people do it with whipped cream.
Now that would be interesting.
Yeah. Oh, and there's the other one too, right? It's called it's called the Russian Mick, right? Where you use Bailey's Irish cream instead of the milk.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking for some caramel Baileys because I thought that would be good, but couldn't find any.
So what are we talking about tonight, man?
Well, so we're going to get into let's see, make sure I get it right. The subjectivity of spiritual experiences. And you and I were talking about this, and I told you that's where my mindset has been for the last week or so. So you said, let's hit that on Freeology. So I'll just kind of kick it off with first by defining what do we mean when we talk about subjective experience, or what's the difference between that which is subjective and that which is objective. And so the easiest way for me to understand this and explain this is the objective has to do with what's outside of us. The subjective has to do with our mind, emotions, perceptions, what's inside of us. So you have the experience, the objective, and you have the experiencer, which is the subjective. So to make it really simple, when I die, or you die, or someone dies, the subjective part goes away, but the world continues to exist and life continues to go on, right? So the life that continues to go on represents the objective reality.
Yeah.
The part that dies represents the subjective part of reality. And so regardless of what one thinks happens after death, when I put off this body, my ability to experience the objective physical reality that we have in this earth is gone. But the world itself is not gone. Does that seem to make sense?
Yeah.
We explain that?
Yep.
So
that's right on.
So there's an interplay. You always have subjective experience involved in everything, or you don't have an experience. Because there has to be that which is experienced, the objective, and that which is the experiencer, the subjective. So to use a simple illustration, we all know the sun's going to come up tomorrow, right?
Yep.
That's an objective reality, unless, you know, something completely catastrophic happens.
Right.
So that the earth quits spinning, then we know the earth is going to continue to spin and the sun's going to come up. Now, we've been able to identify in modern times the objective, well, unless you're a flat earther, the objective reality that the Earth, suspended in space, rotates as it's rotating around the sun. And so each time it makes a full turn, the Earth makes a full turn, we experience night and day. So that's the objective reality. But we don't have to know any of that to know that the sun is going to come up tomorrow.
Right.
People for millennia had different thoughts and ideas about what caused the sun to go down or caused the sun to come up. They could think that the sun was a god riding in a chariot who descends into the underworld when it gets dark and then triumphs over it again the next day, the chariot rider in the sky, right?
Yep.
But subjectively, we all know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. So we don't need to rely on any kind of objective experience to know the truth that the sun is going to come up tomorrow, because we can depend upon our subjective experience, because that's what always happens.
Right.
Now, here's the difference between common experience or shared experience and where the subjectivity of spiritual experience becomes a little bit more complex, because collectively humanity has the shared subjective experience that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. So because we share that in our subjective experience, we can state it as a matter of fact, and we can speak with a universal authority or tone with everyone else.
Let me interject. Is that where we assign objectivity to something?
Is that where yeah, sure, for sure. But it's complete,
Okay.
but it can be completely subjective, is my point, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because it's a shared experience, then there's no problem. When we start getting into spiritual things, there may very well be something out there that we are experiencing.
Yeah.
But it's not a shared collective experience. It's my subjective experience.
Right.
Right? So therefore, your subjective experience in spirituality may be completely different than my subjective experience in reality, which may be completely different than, say, I'm going to pick on Beth Urban, because she's openly practicing witchcraft and paganism and those kinds of things. So her subjective experience spiritually is probably completely different than yours or mine. So we don't have this common shared subjective experience that we can depend upon, that everyone else has had, right? So then the problem becomes when we try to make this truth, like we can say, okay, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and we can say that collectively as truth because it's all part of our subjective experience. But when I try to say my spiritual experience is truth for you, Derrick, or is truth for Beth Urban, or is truth universally for all of humanity, we have two problems. Number one, I'm elevating my subjective experience as having greater authority, greater impact, or greater weight than your subjective experience or Beth's subjective experience or somebody halfway around the world, their subjective experience. I'm saying mine is the truth, yours isn't, but based upon what? You see what I'm saying? Like
Right.
we can base the veracity of our subjective experience that the sun's going to come up tomorrow because everybody shares in that experience. But when you have multiple different experiences of spirituality that are 100% subjective to the person who had the experience, then based upon what criteria then do I say my subjective experience is universal truth for every person? So that's the first problem.
Yeah.
And then the second problem, and I'll kick it over to you. The second problem is this: if I hear about other people's subjective experiences and they are different than mine, what do I do with those subjective experiences? And that's where I'll kick it over to you.
And all of that is, this is one of these growing in real time moments, right? Because when you talked about sunrise is a shared subjective experience. Now, we might assign an objectivity to that because it's corporate, because it's universal, right? But is it really? And this is something that this was something that's really stretching me, what's really challenging me is that at the end of the day, because I always talk about what's tangible, measurable, and repeatable.
Right.
And that is the measure of objectivity for me.
Hmm.
However, it can be tangible to me, measurable by me, and repeatable in my purview, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And not to anyone else. I mean, it's like I could say that this has happened like clockwork.
Hmm.
And I could give you evidence. I could cite examples, right? And this is another thing, like people will like a lot. An atheist touchstone is the theory of evolution, right? And so the Christian touchstone is creationism,
Hmm.
right? And so the creationists will say, well, it's called the theory of evolution because it's a theory.
Right.
And I always say the people who say that in that context really don't understand the scientific method, because a theory is basically a hypothesis that has been tested, peer reviewed, and accepted as the de facto standard.
Hmm.
It's not truth because, like for example, um, there was this thing called I forget what it's called, some kind of ether, right? And they said that everything that where there isn't light, a point of light, that there's this ether, and this light travels through this ether, right? Well, we know now that there is no ether, but for 200 years,
Hmm.
that was the accepted theory, right? And so that we talked about this, you and I, a couple of days, or yeah, I think it was last night actually.
Last night. Yeah.
We were talking about prismatic applications where you're able to bend light or expand light into multiple color spectrums, right? And at the time, when people first introduced prisms, that was considered to be heresy. It was like blasphemy. This was, it was witchcraft, right? Because people didn't understand it. So what I'm saying is that a theory may be good today, but tomorrow it may not be. And because of that very reason, that every theory is actually subjective. We may call it objective, and this is the funny thing. Like, so I'm going to take us back to when Derrick and Aaron were preachers of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so many times, and I've seen this happen to you, Aaron, when you were preaching. I've seen, and I know it happened to me when I was preaching, that people who were schooled in theology would always try to discern as to whether or not you were applying exegesis or eisegesis,
Yeah.
right? In other
Hmm.
words, were you actually unpacking the text and viewing it for what it's trying to say, or are you eisegeting it where you are reading into the text
Hmm.
to basically curve fit some theory that you
Right.
have, or hypothesis that you have? And so I came to the conclusion before I left Christian ministry that there really is no such thing as exegesis,
Hmm.
because exegesis assumes that there is a universal overarching truth that's accepted by all,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And there isn't. So that means that everything in terms of from a hermeneutic perspective, right, or a homiletic perspective, that everything is eisegesis, right?
Yes.
Because you're always reading into it. So that being said, that when we look at the difference between what is subjective and objective, and and again, this is where I may piss off a lot of my atheist friends, is that there is no such thing as an objective reality, because this objectivity is limited to the person who's observing. And this is like, man, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I promise you I'm going
All right.
somewhere with this. That in quantum physics, the mere fact that you observe a quantum phenomenon changes either its velocity or its position.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the characteristic of a quantum phenomenon is directly influenced by who's observing it and when,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that means that you and I could both be observing the same quantum phenomenon. We could both be observing the same boson
Mm-hmm.
or the same wave. But because you're observing it, it's causing it to do something else. And I'm looking at it and causing it to do something else. And so this is something you and I have talked about before, that basically a wave function has to collapse into something that everyone agrees on in order for something to exist in a way that's tangible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I'm getting at, and I'll say this, and I'm going to kick it back to you, is that we and I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty as fuck of this, because I'll say, okay, because you had this experience and no one else did, therefore it's not tangible, measurable, or repeatable, and therefore I dismiss your experience out of hand, right? Without subjecting it to the same rigor that I would subject anything else to, right? Because even if I subject it to the same rigor that I subject anything else to, doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Right.
So back to you, Aaron.
So so many different, such good stuff there, and so many different ways to take this. But let me do it this way, because I'm all for science and tangible, measurable, and repeatable. So, but again, we come back to this idea of shared experience in terms of what people will believe, right?
Yep.
So let me give you a couple of examples with science. My kids they're barely starting to do basic science experiments, and they were working with electricity, right? And so they get the big batteries with the springs on them, and get the wires and get a light bulb, and you set one to the positive, one to the negative, touch them both to the light bulb's going to light up, right?
Yep.
That's a very simple, tangible, measurable, very repeatable experiment. And it's also something that we all share in our subjective reality. Most of us around the world have electricity in some form, right?
Yep.
So again, it's part of humanity's shared experience. But let's pick on the vaccines. I'm gonna go with the vaccines, because based on the criteria that you set out, that you have a hypothesis, it's been tested over and over in a laboratory or in a trial,
Yep.
right? And it has to reach a certain statistical measure,
Yep.
or efficacy, in order to say, okay, this is scientifically proven. Let's just pick on the COVID vaccine. This is scientifically proven to prevent serious illness and death from the coronavirus, right?
Yep.
And then it's peer reviewed. There's people that have reviewed the research. There's people like Dr. Paul Offit, who sits on who's been very, I think, one of the most articulate people in terms of the vaccine and about its efficacy and its limitations and its possible, side effects and dangers. And he sits on the committee with the FDA independently to evaluate and vote, on FDA approvals for emergency use or authorizations and things like this. However, there's a pretty significant swath of our population that thinks that's all bullshit and would rather take their chances getting a wild infection from the virus than getting the jab, as they say, right? So how does this work? Because unlike the light bulb, it's not as common in our subjective experience. You see what I'm saying? So to the person who believes that the vaccine is dangerous or more dangerous than a wild type infection or whatever the case may be, they are rejecting that information. But here's how they're doing it, I think. We are always comparing new information to what we have received as truth, which is based on our subjective experience.
Yeah.
So if I'm a person who really has no understanding of how this type of research is done, maybe I don't even understand what you mean or what I mean when we say peer reviewed, because that's not part of our vocabulary. That's not part of our education. And maybe we vaccinated our child with some other vaccine and they had a bad reaction and got really sick. Or maybe I took the flu vaccine one year and got a really bad rash on my arm and something that, I just had a really bad reaction to that. So now when this new vaccine comes out, that's brand new technology, I don't have, as part of my subjective experience, what all this means in terms of how it's tested and how it's vetted and how it's going forward. Then I'm going to compare that new information that's coming out that's saying, hey, here's something that's scientific. Here's something that was verifiable. Here's something that was repeatable. Here's something that's measurable. But I'm comparing that new information with my own subjective experiences. And so therefore, based on my own comparison and what's right for me, I'm going to reject or choose not to get the vaccination. So there are some similarities. I don't want to make a false equivalence here.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to bring this to as part of the conversation. So there can be some similarities when people are coming to me with their subjective spiritual experiences. I'm going to go through the same process.
Yep.
What they experience could be 100% real. If they say, Jesus Christ showed up in my living room and the place lit up, and if we'd have had CNN cameras there, the entire world would have seen it, right? It can be 100% objectively real. And they might even have proof of it.
Yep.
They might have witnesses. They might have tested it and proven it and whatever.
Yep.
But if in my subjective experience, there's no framework for that, I have no experience with that, I have no resonance with that, then I'm probably going to reject that in much the same way that an anti-vaxxer would reject the COVID vaccine. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And this is true also then. This is what I find so fascinating in the whole, and I'm not lumping you in with this, sort of the atheist materialist versus theist paranormal experiencer, right? Yeah. But the atheist actually does the same thing. Most of them, the atheist or the materialist, for the most part, does the same thing. I've never had experience, or I've had experience that I can explain away pretty easily as that was my imagination. That was just a coincidence. That was just, as I think you said in our conversation last night, the bad pizza that I had.
Yeah.
So I'm comparing what's being presented to me objectively by someone else. In other words, it's objective information. It's out there.
Yep.
And I'm measuring it by my experience. So somebody who has had limited experiences or has explained away whatever experiences that they have had right or wrong, whether it was the pizza or it wasn't the pizza, right? They've explained it away. So it's not part of their subjective reality. And someone comes and presents that. On the flip side of that, a materialist can come to someone like me, where I have a lot of really strange experiences that have been repeatable in my life, verified at least by me and some others,
Yep.
measurable in its effects, in that something happened out here, and repeatable in that I may not be able to repeat it like I would a battery in a light bulb or flipping on a switch, but
Mhm.
repeatable in that it's not a once in a blue moon kind of thing.
Right.
So now when I hear the materialist talking, I'm sorting that information by comparing it to my subjective experience, and I'm forming an opinion.
Yeah. Yep.
Did I explain that well enough?
No, that's perfect. And here's the thing: is that you and I, we've talked about this. Like we both have had the experience where we've seen the supernatural
Mhm.
happen.
Mhm.
Someone gets healed, a broken bone is healed, blind eye is open, a deaf ear is healed. A person who couldn't speak is now able to speak. You know, all of these different things. We've seen this, right?
Mhm.
But then we all both have had the experience of the guy in the back, the paraplegic, that is waiting to get healed and doesn't, right? And so here's where I've committed fallacy, because what I would say is, well, okay, that when you have a corporate agreement,
Mhm.
that you're able to, through the power of thinking,
Mhm.
that you're able to affect a material result.
Mhm.
Okay. And that dismisses anything spiritual or interdimensional or whatever you want to call it, right?
Right.
And so this is the thing where I wrestle, where I'm not, where I don't have 100% certainty or even
Mm.
close to that, is that yes, when I was a Christian preacher, I saw some things that I could not explain.
Mhm.
Now, I'll go back now and I put my atheist hat on and I
Mhm.
say, yes, I can explain that. I can explain that. There's a scientific explanation. And there may be, and let me just say this for everyone out here who's humanist, materialist, because at the end of the day, nobody holds a monopoly on truth.
Right.
Nobody holds a monopoly on truth. And so there are things that are true in a moment, and there are things that are true in over time,
Mhm.
right? So the thing that I'm learning, I say I'm learning because this is in real time, right?
Mhm.
That I cannot simply dismiss out of hand the experience, someone's spiritual experience, because this is something I used to preach this all the time. I used to say a man with an experience is not at the mercy of a man with an argument.
Right.
I used to preach that. So, yes, you have an experience. And yes, your experience has some validity, even if I can't see it. Now, I can say that, show me the evidence,
Mhm.
the tangibility, the measurability, the repeatability. I can ask that, right? But the reality is that you are under no obligation to prove anything to me, right? Because the only way that you are under obligation to prove anything to me is if you insist I believe as you that I believe as you do.
Mhm. Right.
If you're not insistent upon me believing as you believe,
Right.
then you owe me no explanation,
Right.
right? Now, this is what I want to get to before I kick it back over to you, is that just because, like, okay, we talk about sunrise and sunset,
Hmm.
and we call that objective because it's a universal experience, but it's not really objective. It's really corporately subjective. In other words, we all, because watch this, everybody sees the sunrise and the sunset differently,
Hmm.
and you could prove that with art. How many paintings of sunrises and sunsets are there?
Hmm.
I don't know, thousands, hundreds of thousands. This is a phenomenon that happens all the time. And yet, hundreds of thousands of artists see the same phenomenon
Right.
differently, which
Yeah.
means that it is a subjective experience. It's corporately subjective, but it's subjective nonetheless. And so this is what I want to throw out there, right, to everyone that's watching. Oh, and if you're watching on YouTube, please click like and subscribe. Quick plug. Uh, the reality is, if you, there really is no, okay, so like those in the atheist camp will say there is no God, right?
Right.
I'm going to take this a step further, which will challenge both the atheist and the theist camps, and say that there is no such thing as objectivity.
Hmm.
You cannot make the case for what you consider to be objective
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, your observation, and again, going back to the whole concept of quantum, the uh, phenomenon of observability or observation influencing outcomes, that the mere fact that you observe something changes something means that whatever you're the entire act of observation is really a subjective experience.
Hmm.
So what I'm learning, and this is the thing that I'm learning real time, and y'all watch me grow, watch me expand. In the words of Steely Dan, this is the day of the expanding man,
Hmm.
right? Watch me. I am not going to discount someone's objective or subjective experience. I'm going to use somebody here. And I don't know if you know Keith Williams or not.
No.
But Keith is a former pastor, and he was part of the Grace Camp for many years. And Keith has expanded, but he had this experience where he was riding an ATV. He has like a lot of property down in Alabama, and he was riding an ATV, and this thing flipped over on him. A 600-pound ATV fell on him, and he clinically died for like 4 minutes.
Hmm.
And so during this time, he had a conversation, or he had an encounter, a conversation with Jesus.
Hmm.
And he wrote a book about it. His book sold pretty well. It was very well received in Christian circles. And so Keith's a good friend of mine, and we have some differences in opinion because of beliefs and everything. But I told him, I said, I don't believe that you saw Jesus. That's what I told him. But I have to walk that back now because I don't know what he saw. I don't know who he saw.
Hmm.
This is an experience that he had, and it was real enough for him to record it, to testify to it, and to write about it.
Right.
It's something that was so real to him that it cost him everything.
Mm.
It cost him everything.
Hmm.
And so Keith, if you're watching, I want to say publicly that I no longer discount your experience. Your
Mm.
experience is your experience. And those things that are subjective, those of us who pride ourselves on being a bastion of objectivity, I cannot say anymore that this is that what you experience is objectively wrong. I can't say that. I have to respect your subjectivity. And so Aaron, before I kick it back to you, I want you to talk about this book that you were telling me about.
Sure.
And,
Yeah, I was going to go there.
yeah, because if someone says that they've been abducted by aliens, that they had an anal probe or whatever it was that was done to them, right? We will simply, those of us who call ourselves mired in the objective, and I mean that literally, mired in, like you were talking about walking in peanut butter, right? That you're mired in objectivity to the point where you can't see the possibility of anything else. So someone has an experience and they say, I was abducted by aliens. And the objective realist, humanist, materialist will respond, well, oh no, Derrick, that's just not possible.
Hmm.
I want you to explain
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. Let me just comment on a couple things that I picked up of what you were saying earlier too, because this is what's interesting. Even with objective, what we would call objective truth, meaning this is solid, this is reality, this is truth, no matter what, right?
But is it?
Perception, because of the way time and space works, and perception, here's how it comes into play. Simple example. If I were to ask you, Derrick, to look up, in the corner of your computer or whatever at your phone, what time is it?
Well, according to my clock, it's 1845.
Of course, you'd use military time.
Of course, I use military time.
So that's 6:45. So according to my clock, it's 5:45
PM.
p.m. Now, who's telling the truth?
Well, of course I am, Aaron, because I'm using military time. God damn it!
But you see what I'm saying? It's like we want truth to be so simple and so concrete and so absolute for everybody, and yet even things that are true because of the nature of the world we live in, it can be true. Two things can be true at the same time that don't reconcile. Now we can reconcile it by saying, okay, you're on Central Time and I'm on Mountain Time, but I think I'm making the point, right?
Yep. Everything that's true is not truth, and everything that is truth is not true.
Right. Right. So, and then here's the other thing I would say. It's interesting to me. You said something really interesting, and you said, that you and I both experienced miracles. We experienced healings, things like that.
Yep.
And when you started to deconstruct and you started to wrestle with all these things, you're being presented with information that is persuasive enough for you that it's moving you away from your former positions about the Bible, about Jesus, about God, about creation, all that stuff, right?
Yep.
So it had to be formidable information, if I can describe it that way. Kind of makes it sound like it's an opponent, but it had teeth, it had substance, it had weight to it, right?
Yep.
And so because of that, because of your unique subjective experience, having been a pastor, having experienced these things, and moving into atheism, it became necessary for you to find an explanation, or at least try to find an explanation. And me as well. What do I do with all these experiences that I had back here?
Mm-hmm.
And trying to find an explanation, because previously our explanation was simple. God did it. He confirmed his word with signs following. And so therefore, this is evidence that what we are saying and what we believe is true. But now you're in a crisis of faith. Not, maybe it's not true. It's impossible for it to be true. Wow, it's pretty shaky. Even the evidence that Jesus was a historical person is pretty suspect.
Yep.
Maybe Jesus didn't even exist. So now and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, I'm just pointing out how our minds work.
Yep.
The explanation becomes more important than the experience. In other words, I can't just say, I experience these things, but now I have an explanation for why I experience these things, and it takes precedent. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
But that's a subjective shift in thinking. It doesn't have to. You and I both could just say, we experience that stuff, who knows, and move on. But here's the problem. Because religion wants to export these subjective experiences onto everybody else and mandate that it has to be true for everybody else, whether they've experienced it or not.
Exactly.
Therefore, you have to subject your subjective experience, which at the end of the day is all you really have.
Yeah.
And you have to subject it to my subjective experience. And then we put all this weight on it, because if you don't, you're going to go to hell. Or if you don't, God's going to curse your life. Or if you don't, your child's not going to get healed. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So therefore, we cannot just deal with the experience itself. We cannot just deal with the phenomena itself and accept the phenomena itself. So just like your friend, I forgot his name already because I'm getting Keith Williams. You know, it's very easy to come back and say, Keith, I believe you. I believe that you experienced that, and I honor your experience, without it carrying the weight of this has to be absolute truth, right, objectively for everybody else, that everybody has to, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. You see what I'm saying? Exactly. So we can't isolate the testimony of subjective experience and let it stand on its own merits, because we've attached collectively so much weight to what that experience means. So that's an aboutism. So here's what I'm saying. You have the actual experience, and then you have to give meaning to that experience. What is that experience about? So anytime I give meaning, it's what is this about? Okay, I had this experience with Jesus. What does this mean? So now I'm thinking, what is this about? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
And that's where we get into trouble, because we can't just let the experience stand on its own merits. But so what we're arguing about is the level of meaning, which is a separation or a step above, a meta step above the experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but this is what, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I think you're getting at, is that, we look at this and we say, what does this mean? Right. Exactly. And so we're looking for a global overarching meaning, yes, instead of saying, what does this mean to me?
Right.
Right. And so that's the thing. Like, okay, so when I look at supernatural phenomenon, I could say that this is what I saw happen, and this is what I believe was behind it. Now, I say this is what I believe, so that I can frame it as subjective as belonging to my idea set.
Exactly.
Right? Not that I believe this and therefore this is what it is for everyone. I can't say that. I can't say that. Right. And again, as an atheist and as an anti-apologist, right? This is that's been the approach that I've taken. But what I'm saying to everybody that's watching is that I owe many people an apology. Because and y'all, listen, I said this yesterday. I said, fuck humility. Humility is overrated. This is not self-deprecation and Derrick being humble. This is just saying, okay, that in an objective sense, right, that I don't consider all the factors. I haven't considered all the factors. I'm not saying that I'm wrong. I'm just saying that I didn't give the treatment to the facts that, or the treatment to the experiences that I should have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because what happens is that we like the way we treat a fact or the way we treat an occurrence, we either say, okay, this is factual or this is bullshit, right? and it's easy to dismiss that which is not what is not tangible, measurable, and repeatable to you as bullshit. But it doesn't. What I'm saying to everyone, and this is my corporate apology, right? That you had the experience. Who am I to discount your experience? Now, that being said, that being said, those who have the experience and make a demand on everyone else that they accept this experience as empirical evidence, that's where you get out of line. That's where you go off the rails. It's okay for you to have the experience. If I'm going to be true to my humanism and true to how I honor the human experience, then I must honor your experience whether or not I think that it is valid or not.
Right.
Because until someone proves otherwise, all I have is your testimony versus my plumb line.
Right.
Right? So the thing is that is my plumb line, perfectly true? No. No. It's not. And so if you have an experience and you say, I had this experience, and Aaron, this is something you've been teaching. I mean, for the last 6 weeks or so, you're
Yeah.
talking about, that when people have this experience, it is not just incorrect. Let me just use incorrect. It's not correct to simply dismiss it out of hand. In other words, that when someone has an experience, you have to at least consider the experience before you can even perform any amount of analysis on it. Because if you dismiss it out of hand, you're simply saying, "Okay, I just refuse to accept this. So I won't consider this. I won't analyze it. I won't apply any test to it." And then here's the thing: even if I go through the whole scientific process, I consider your hypothesis, I consider your data, I subject your data to peer review. Then others conduct experiments based on your evidence, and now like, okay, so let's say after all of that we come out and say, okay, this is not right. It doesn't pass the smell test.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know it happened. So the thing is that I have to honor the experience until something happens where you say the experience. Okay, I ate a sandwich with some bad mayonnaise, Derrick. And up until that point, I have to honor your experience.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you something. Let me just say this for everyone that's watching. This actually is painful for me to admit, but in the interest of intellectual honesty, I have to.
Yeah. Well, so let me and thank you for that, Derrick. It's one of the things I really appreciate about you. And we're all wrestling with these things. We're all trying to, especially those of us that were pastors and those of us that have deconstructed and we're presented with other information. We're wrestling with this stuff. We're growing in real time all the time, And so thank you for demonstrating that real-time growth for everybody, because we need to be able to do that, or we're not going to be able to grow. We get locked into positions and then we can't expand beyond those positions when new information comes in. So you're actually just demonstrating your faith in scientific processes by saying, okay, I have new information now.
Well, hold on. Because see, here, this is what I want to say is that it's not, because if I say everything has to be subject to scientific rigor, then I become a materialist.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm not there.
yeah,
I'm a humanist, but I'm not a materialist.
yeah, and reductionist too,
Right.
unintentionally reductionist, because you can't subject history. No historical information that we've gotten can fit into the context of a scientific model. They
Right.
use completely different criteria to decide what is true in regards to history, right?
Yep.
And part of what they use is comparison. So you asked me to do like this book review. So I've been reading this book, The Supernatural. It's written by Whitley Steber and or Steber, Whitley Steber, I think that's right, and Jeffrey Kripal. So
Yep.
Whitley Steber has written several books about experiences, abduction experiences that he's had. Communion maybe being the most well-known one. I think it was the first one that he wrote. They made a movie out of it. Yeah, I just saw Ben Irvin, a comment popped up. He said communion.
Yep.
So, and then Jeffrey Kripal is the academic chair of the philosophy department and religious studies department at Rice University. And they each write a chapter. So Whitley will write a chapter about some of his experiences, and then Jeffrey will come back and provide his critical analysis as an academic in philosophy and religious studies of what Whitley has written. And it's one of the, for me, it's just one of the best books I've read, but whatever's speaking to me in the moment is always one of the best books that I've read. But here's my thing. I'm thinking supernatural. I'm thinking, when I bought the book, I'm thinking, okay, normal paranormal activity. And here's what I mean by normal paranormal activity: psychic activity, ESP, telepathy, mind over matter, healing, ghosts. That's kind of, out of body experiences, near death experiences.
Extraterrestrials.
Well, but for me, you got to understand, like where you were at. I just wasn't on board with the whole extraterrestrial thing. But that's because I'm comparing my experience. I've never seen a UFO. I've never had an alien abduction, I guess, thank God. I'm not looking forward to an anal probe anytime soon or whatever. So again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm outright dismissing a lot of alien stuff because to me it just sounds too much like you've watched too much Star Trek or something. And as a therapist, clinical therapist, I know that there are people that can have experiences that are completely delusional because of brain diseases, right? So it's easy for me to dismiss that as delusion or whatever. So, but here's the interesting thing, and this is where I want to invite all of us to think about how else we can think about lending weight or credibility to subjective experiences. Because up until this point, we've been talking about individual subjective experiences. So your friend had a near-death experience and talked to Jesus. That's his individual subjective experience. So Whitley had a cabin in upstate New York, and anybody that's seen the movie or read the book, when he's at his cabin, there are phenomena taking place that everyone in the cabin experiences. So they see lights outside, they hear sounds. There's some kind of seemingly objectively verifiable phenomena that happens. But for him, when he goes to sleep, he wakes up and these blue troll-like creatures, these short little blue trolls with like almost reptilian faces, although not the scaly skin, right?
Yeah.
They take him out of his bed and they perform all kinds of things, including various sex acts on him and tests on him, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm listening to this, Derrick, and I'm like I'm like, with some of the things you were just saying, I'm like, blue trolls? Are you fucking kidding me right now?
But here's my thing. If somebody says blue trolls, my scientific mind would normally check out on that.
Yeah. Right. So, but here's where the point I want to get to. So he writes his book and whatever, and Of course, in the movie and in the book, he ends up, getting involved in a support group for people that had alien abduction. But the thing that's interesting about Whitley is he does not believe these were aliens from outer space. But now here's the really fascinating thing. And then later he meets a female, almost like a gray alien, what we think of with the grays, and they start a sexual relationship. And he talks about all these things. But here's the interesting thing, Derrick. He put that stuff out in print, and he starts getting thousands of letters of people saying, I had the same experience with these blue beings.
Okay.
And they took me just like that, only my experience differed in this way. And there was sexual penetration, and in other words, my experience matches your experience. And he's getting thousands of letters. Now he looks into it historically, and he finds out that in European folklore, there are blue trolls that live in caves that fit the exact description of what he'd experienced in Nordic folklore, in Celtic folklore.
Yep.
Same types of beings, similarities in the experiences. Jeffrey Kripal comes along, and his doctoral dissertation was on Tantra yoga or Tantra. And he looks at the picture that Whitley had drawn of the woman that he had this sexual relationship with. And there are, according to Kripal, similar drawings and similar type experiences talked about in India with striking similarities between the beings that they experienced.
Yep.
So now you've got something else. Now you've got not just one person with their subjective experience, but you have contemporaries who say, I've had the same experiences. And then you can look into history where other people experienced similar things, and it shows up in their folklore, or it shows up in their drawings, or it shows up in their religion. And there are so many similarities to the type of experience. Now you're not just dealing with one person's subjective experience. Now you're dealing with a whole collective of people who said, I've had the same type of subjective experiences.
Yeah. And
so then we have to come along and say, okay, and this is why, like, this stuff's exciting to me, because it's like, okay, there has to be something to this. When there are people that have never met that say, I've had the same type of experience, I didn't know anyone else had experienced what I had experienced. And then you can find similarities throughout the world to the experiences being reported by somebody who says, I didn't know anybody else had this experience. And the other interesting thing about Whitley was he, unbeknownst to him at the time this was happening, because it happened in the mid to late 80s, he was living in a certain part of upstate New York that a few decades previously was a hotbed of UFO activity.
Yep.
So now, all these pieces are kind of coming together. Now, does that mean that I want to believe that there are blue trolls out there that are waiting to come and kidnap us and perform perverted sex acts?
No, but you can no longer dismiss it out of hand.
Exactly my point.
So can I share a UFO story?
Yeah, of course.
Because this is literally a true story, right? Angela and I got married on May 31st, 2003 in Dallas, Texas, right? I had to fly down on Thursday the 29th because we had to pick up our marriage license from the county courthouse, from the Dallas County Courthouse, and have this at the time we got married, so the preacher could sign it, right? As we are leaving the Dallas County Courthouse, Angela's driving, I'm in the passenger seat, and I look up and I see a silver cigar-shaped object.
Wow.
Now, that's me. but let me tell you something about my wife. My wife is like, she is the most no bullshit kind of person
Yeah.
that there is.
Yeah.
And I showed it to her and she said, "Holy fuck. We're looking at a real UFO." And so as we're moving, this thing is tracking with us. Now, is it following us? Probably not. We're not important people, right? But it's there. But at a certain point, after we have been watching this for about 20 minutes, this thing, I mean, Aaron, literally, I mean, and you could tell it didn't just disappear, it moved
Mm-hmm.
at an incredible rate of speed,
Mm-hmm.
and it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the thing. We were not, as it turns out, we went and looked at the reporting around this. We were not the only one who saw it. This had been seen by many other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, does that mean that we saw something and that everybody else that was involved that they saw something? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Or did we actually see something empirical? That's the question. Maybe,
Right.
maybe not. But we all had an experience,
Right.
and that experience is legit, whether or not anybody else wants to accept it or not. And so this is the thing that I'm getting at. And again, I'm saying this all with all the deconstruction of pride that I can muster, that those of you who say, "Well, I saw Jesus. Jesus spoke to me." I've actually had people they say, "Well, Jesus spoke to me." And you know what my first question is whenever somebody says that? Okay, what did Jesus look like?
Yeah. Right.
You
Right.
know, because it's like if it's the blonde hair, blue eye Jesus, I'm really going to dismiss this out of hand. But watch this. We are influenced by the information that we have received,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
So here's the thing. You talked about experiences where you've seen your mother
Right.
after she was gone in a shimmering multicolored garment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this doesn't say that you didn't see your mother or that you didn't see some spiritual or interdimensional phenomenon that resemble your mother. This is not to dismiss that at all, you know, but the thing is that you were influenced by the vision or the visage of your
Mm-hmm.
mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, for better or for worse, colored what you saw,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I tell people to
For
this
sure.
day, my grandmother died in October of 1971, and it was on a Friday. I don't remember the exact date anymore, but I remember when she died, and my grandmother was a nurse, and she worked nights, you know, but most Fridays she didn't work, so she was up on Saturday morning cooking breakfast for us, and she would call us out, her grandkids who lived with her, by name. Derrick, Brian, Michelle, come and get breakfast. And so the Friday night that she died, we went to the house where she died, and they had laid her in the bed so we could look at her, right? And then the morticians came and they took her away, right? And so I'm thinking that this is just a really bad dream. So when I woke up Saturday morning, I smelled bacon and eggs cooking. I heard the pots and pans clanking in the kitchen. I heard the gospel music that my grandmother used to always play on the radio. The experience was immaculate. And I heard her call us out by name, by age order: Derrick, Brian, Michelle, coming to eat.
Mm.
And I got up and ran to the kitchen because I said, I just know that this was a bad dream.
Mm,
and the kitchen was clean and quiet. And then I realized that my grandmother was really gone,
mm,
you know, but that was my experience.
mhm,
Now, when I tell people that, they say, "Oh, well, Derrick, you were just dreaming. You were just, you know," no, this was my experience. And so people that have this experience that I don't have, I cannot dismiss their experience out of hand. I cannot relegate their experience to the realm of just, vain subjectivity, because this is something they experienced.
mhm.
And so Aaron, when you were telling me about this, brother, listen, this resonated with me in a very difficult way.
Mhm.
Y'all, everybody who's watching this, pay attention, because I'm not admitting this easily. This is something that I have to, I have to, you have experiences. Some of you have said to me, I've had this experience and I dismissed your experience out of hand. I'm sorry.
Mm,
I'm sorry.
mm.
Because your experience is your experience. And who the fuck am I to discount your experience? Now, all of that being said, this is the issue where I have where I have an issue, is that when you say that your experience must dictate my reality.
Right.
That that's where I kick it back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, that really is the problem, because what we're actually asking people to do when we do that is to completely deny their own self, their own subjective experiences as well, in favor of our story, which cannot be a shared experience. If I were to say to you, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, I have an authority to say that to you because we have a shared experience. If I say to you, I saw my mom at the foot of the bed, therefore, when people die, they get these multicolored robes. And if you don't believe in the multicolored robe, you're going to go
Exactly.
to a dark
But
place.
but but here's the thing. You know, if you say I saw my mother with this multicolored robe, that's your experience. I can't
No, I hear
discount
you.
that. But
I hear you.
if you say that we have to see everyone that's gone to the great beyond in a multicolored robe,
That's the point
yeah,
I'm making. That's
yep,
that's that's the point that I'm trying to make. Let me just offer my thoughts on, and this is totally just Aaron's thoughts, um, on, people that see Jesus, they see him as white, blue eyed, whatever. But, what did he look like? When we're dealing with these things, in my opinion, from my point of view, we're dealing with non physical realities. So they don't really have physical form. So in other words, I saw my mom in a body, but she doesn't really have a body. Her body, I mean, this is grotesque, but we could go exhume it. It's still going to be there.
yep,
You know what I mean? So whatever existence she has, it's non-physical. It's not in that body. So my theory is that of consciousness and energy, right?
yep,
So our a function of consciousness is to give form and name to energy and other consciousness, right? And we produce that. So here's the wonderful thing and the difficult thing. If consciousness is both creative and perceptive, which we know to be true in ourselves, I can imagine something, I can create an image, right? Or I can perceive something. So it's both creative and perceptive. So what if people that have encounters with Jesus or Buddha or Krishna or blue aliens are actually encountering something, but because it exists in a non-physical way, the way they've been culturally informed,
hmm,
or the way their mind's working in that moment, they are giving shape and form to the energy that they're experiencing. So in other words, what if there is a all-loving energy current. Let's look at it this way. An energy current that is all-loving, an energy current that is nurturing or whatever. And we have some disembodied experience, be it a near-death experience or a dream or whatever.
Yep.
And we experience this energy, and we are culturally conditioned to think of Jesus, white Jesus, black Jesus, blue Jesus, doesn't matter,
Right.
to represent for us
I
symbolically.
like blue Jesus, by the way.
Yeah. What's coming through that current of energy, or if we're conditioned to see it as Buddha, or we're conditioned to see it in some other form as higher evolved aliens, we are coming into contact with that current of energy. And then we are the ones, through the creative aspect of consciousness, that are giving it its form and its shape. But we mistake our creation for our perception. We conflate the
Ooh.
two.
Say that
And
again.
then we go out. We mistake our creation for our perception. What I'm perceiving is the love, the care, the providence, whatever that's coming from that current of energy. But I'm giving it form. I'm creating the form because I grew up in a Western culture. I grew up in a Christian household. All these pictures in my Methodist church of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus loving his sheep or whatever. So when I encounter that force, I encounter that what best in my mind represents that for me because of my cultural conditioning is this blonde, blue-haired Jesus. So I create as the template.
Yep.
I manufacture the form around this energy so that I have a way to connect with it as a human being, right?
Yep.
But then I conflate that and I say, oh, that was Jesus. No, that was just that current of energy and consciousness that I was experiencing. And now I'm putting my cultural shaping and my cultural ideas and my projections around it and mistaking that as perception,
Right.
and then calling it reality and then trying to export it to other people.
Dude, that is the thing. Because energy is ubiquitous.
Right.
Consciousness is ubiquitous. But in our own sphere of influence, we shape that energy and that consciousness into something that is readily consumable by ourselves, right? So what happens is that it, like to your point, what you just said was, dude, this is the stopping point. You export your perception as if it were truth. And
Right.
that's the challenge that we deal with things that are spiritual, because at the end of the day, it's all eisegesis. At the end of the day, it's all subjective. There is no such thing. Let me say that again for the people in the back. There is no such thing as an objective reality. Quantum physics proves that to be true. Anti-materialism proves that to be true. There are so many different paradigms that actually throw shade on that, right? So here we have, we're in a position where we have some experience, but we have to be intellectually honest enough to say that this experience that we're experiencing, that this is colored by our cultural biases, our intellectual biases, our spiritual biases, and our emotional biases. And so again, when we and this is something you and I we've gone back and forth about this, and this is let me just say this for everybody that's watching. One of the things Aaron and I are going to do, we're going to do like an after hours, a Freology after hours, where if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can be privy to these discussions, because I'm going to tell you something. What Aaron and I we're going to end this call, And then he and I, we're gonna get on a call and we're gonna continue to drink, maybe have some cigars, and we're gonna talk. And the conversations that we have are listen, when I replay the conversations that you and I have, I'm like, right? So,
Yeah.
I think we need to share these with people for two reasons. One is that I think that they will grow in real time as we do, and then two, it'll help finance this time when you and I can actually get together and do a show in person.
Right. Right.
But let me just say this before I kick it back to you to close it. Is that we all have experiences. We all have something that we see and we believe that this is something that happened. And
Mhm.
and it literally may have happened for us individually. The challenge is that let me put it this way, right? Like that America as a country, we have some really awesome exports. We have cloud computing, which is an awesome export. That we have battery technology, which is an awesome export. That we have space technology, which is an awesome export. But we have some exports that are not so awesome, like gun violence is not awesome. That our viewpoint on abortion, which is not awesome. And so what we have to realize is that each of us, we are individual sovereign nations of one, and that we
Mm.
all have a GDP and a net export that we have to the world. And so we have to say, okay, that is our export of our spiritual experiences, is this something that is good for the rest of the world, or the rest of humanity? And that's the question that we have to ask. Because if our net export is not something that has a legitimate, tangible ROI, then we should keep it to ourselves and not export it. That is where I drop my mic, and over to you, Aaron.
Dude, I can't best you on that. That's the mic drop moment of the evening, I think. So, and I think that's kind of gets at the heart, summarizes, really gets at the heart of what we were trying to talk about in this episode. So, what do we want to do? I mean, we've run over for sure.
Yeah.
Do we want to just thank you for coming to our TED Talk, or do we want to look at some comments? What do you?
That's up to you. I mean, I have plenty of time. I know that you have to feed your kids and everything. Anthony and I just ordered some raised burgers, which is really awesome if you're in the Tulsa area. Um, uh, and and I have to say this too, like that, and sooner or later I'll be able to share this with everybody in a global sense. Aaron, you kind of know about this, but tomorrow I'm going to a beer fest and concert, and one of the acts that's performing is someone that's close to my brother. And so when we just found out that we both live in the Tulsa area. So he's like, okay, dude, you got to come and see me play. So I'm like, okay, I reached out to him and I said, okay, well, what do I need to do? Where do I need to go to get tickets? He said, don't worry about it. He said, just show up. There'll be tickets for you at the gate. You know, and this is a big beer fest. I mean, it's like the tickets are like $70, right? And you go in and you can drink all the beer you want. So I'm gonna Uber in. I'm not gonna drive. I'm gonna Uber in, and I'm gonna have a good time. And but let me just say this, that um, that this all ties back to perception versus reality, right? Because I was under the impression that something else was going on, and then someone else was under the impression of something else was going on, but the reality is really something different. And so now this is actually what I'm going to do tomorrow is actually a healing moment in my family. So I'm
Awesome.
excited. I'm excited.
That's great, man. That's great. I think that's a great place to end it. So I'm going to say, with all authority and all power, thank you for coming to our TED Talk. Thank you for attending our TED Talk. Thanks, everybody, for watching Phreology Friday. I hope it was enriching for you. I
Thank
hope you had as
you.
much fun watching it as we had do when we get together and produce it. And peace and hair grease.
Right on. Thanks, Aaron. Love you, man. And
Love
love
you
you
too, man. I'll
guys.
call you in a bit.